Hello, welcome to China Tonight. I'm Stan Grant. On the program, common prosperity, what it means for the country's filthy rich, how street food is surviving on China's city streets, and Taiwan preparing for war against China. I speak to the Foreign Minister, Joseph Wu.
The defense of Taiwan is in our own hands, and we are absolutely committed to that. And if China is going to launch a war against Taiwan, we will fight to the end, and that is our commitment.
But first today, what are people talking about on the platforms they use? Joining me is Yvonne Yong. And Yvonne, China's government is under considerable pressure at the moment as sweeping power outages across parts of the country lead to blackouts and industry shutdowns.
Stan, it was a pretty grim start to Golden Week for many, as large parts of the country have been hit with power cuts.
就是一片漆黑，什么也看不见，因为全部停电了嘛。只有就车过来的时候能看见灯是亮的，再往骑电动车灯是亮的，剩下的都是一片漆黑。
地铁没停，然后停水停电。 蜡烛，买蜡烛的也挺多的，还有接充电宝的，还过来充电的。
650 million people engaged with the hashtag power rationing in northeastern China. As we've noted in the past, the government does not like its citizenry agitated, but failure to solve the fuel shortage has people furious. With winter approaching, the supply problems have already had a dramatic impact on industrial output. Shops are running by candlelight and mobile networks reportedly failing.
So why is this happening? I spoke to Associate Professor Shunpeng Shi, an energy and economic specialist from the Australia-China Relations Institute at the University of Technology, who advises APEC's Sustainable Energy Centre, who explained emissions targets are part of the problem.
The phenomenon is so-called energy consumption and energy intensity control, because the central government assigned the target to local government who need to achieve that when the time to check the performance. So some provinces are desperately trying to enforce power rationing in order to meet the target. But more fundamentally is the shortage of coal, or put it another way, the price of coal is too high. The coal accounts for about 58+% of first so total primary energy supply. In the power generation, probably still 70%. That's historic context, which makes it very challenging to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. I think in China now, people haven't seen this kind of electricity shortage for many years, and suddenly they realize, oh, the past days come back. So that created a lot of frustration.
For those who weren't suffering blackouts, the National Day celebrations meant plenty of festivities and food. To mark the occasion and sharing of street food treats online. The look of the street food today made me drool, says this fan, and the noodles from a stall on the street helped me get through my day.
Thanks, Yvonne, but the long tradition of street food is under threat in parts of China as officials try to clean up the streets. But there's a lot of resistance to sweeping away this particular tradition. Brendan Wan has the story.
When you think of street food in Australia, you might picture something like the night markets here at Queen Victoria Market in Melbourne. Or maybe you think of this. Closed due to the pandemic, normally cuisines from around the world would be served out here in the open. But in China, it's a different story. With much of the country still open, street food is back on the menu, baby, and it's a quintessential part of life for many.
It's my kind of junk food that I crave, and it's cheap and it's very satisfying. That we've kind of like integrated into all of our lives in China.
At all hours of the day, on any given street corner, you'll see cart-drawn cooktops and vendors dishing out a huge variety of foods. Jianbing, jiaozi, noodles, donkey burgers. You can even get a scorpion on a stick. Check that out. That's right. That's me eating a deep-fried scorpion in Beijing. But that wasn't the only insect I had that day. Check out that caterpillar on my upper lip.
I remember when I first moved to Shanghai in 2011, I saw a lot of those, usually late night outside clubs with lines and like these carts were massive and they had every kind of skewer on the planet. You know, it's like, that looks like mystery meat, but I'll eat it anyway.
Mystery meat to cure your hangover. Yum, 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 yum. But things have changed in recent decades. In some cities, street vendors are being forced off the sidewalk. Strict regulations are making it harder for vendors to operate. They risk getting fined, shut down, and having their wares confiscated.
The government tend to think street vending has a lot of problems associated with that. Hygiene and the block of traffic. I think it also related to the government perception about what is a modern city.
So I think at root, the issue is conceptual.
Professor Anna Greenspan from NYU Shanghai helped run a project called Movable Feast that maps Shanghai's street food and its decline.
There's a kind of notion that particularly informal markets of the street are backward, and that in order for the city to modernize, it has to clean up the streets. I mean, Shanghai, there's beautiful cocktail bars and beautiful restaurants, and you know, of course I like all that, but I also just like to squat on the street and eat a bowl of noodles, and that is getting harder and harder.
For many low-earning Chinese citizens, street food is a cheap and convenient option, and for street vendors, it's a livelihood.
China has been going through the fastest and most intense process of urbanization in history. For those that don't have a lot of resources, selling on the street is a really good way to earn a living. Like, you don't need a lot of capital to set up a street stall.
Oh, here comes the Chengguan.
On the front line of China's push to clean up the streets are local enforcement officers known as Chengguan.
Otherwise, your staff will be, confiscated.
They're not the police per se, but they specialize, but they belong to the city government.
Sometimes described as China's most hated people, Chengguan have been accused of using violent tactics to remove vendors, but they also kind of have a tough job.
They are sandwiched between the local government and the street vendors. Both the auxiliary Chengguan and the street vendors, they come from the similar background. All of them come from the poor population.
Oh wow, looks so good. Su Yanmeng is a staff writer at Radii China in Shanghai. She's written about the city's street food culture, and she's spoken to vendors across the city about their work.
I usually come here once or twice a month, especially on Saturdays and Sundays after having a few drinks with my friends at the bar nearby. It's like perfect comfort food at 2 a.m., you know?
So this guy's like your local food guy, eh? Can you tell us a bit about him?
He is actually from a small city nearby Shanghai, not from Shanghai. He and his wife, and they have been running this business for around 7 years.
It's common for vendors to be migrants, coming to urban centers to try and make a better income. But it's not easy.
每天工作大概我从下午2、3点钟起来，大概到第二天4、5点钟，就第二天的凌晨嘛，4、5点钟，大概有12个小时，13、14个小时吧。
But unfortunately, his relationship with Chengguan is not that much good. It's pretty intense.
Xiyuan says this vendor gets caught by the Chengguan around twice a month.
Some of the penalty might include a few hundred RMB or confiscate their whole cart.
When COVID hit last year, China's economy, like much of the world's, started to lag. And Premier Li Keqiang gave a nod to the nation's street vendors, saying they were the lifeblood of the economy. The comment went viral and set off a wave of media about the rejuvenation of the nation's street food culture. Some cities even relaxed regulations. But the revival may have been short-lived.
And my speculation is that I think this will not last long. It's only temporary. So because there's no systematic change about attitude about what is a modern city.
Some major cities, including Beijing, quickly hosed down expectations and said rules around street vending would still be enforced, leaving many people disappointed.
Street markets in general are what makes a street or a neighborhood lively, right? And so gives the city its culture.
And Brendan One joins me now. You're making me very hungry, Brendan. I was thinking about all that fantastic street food from Shanghai, the baozi, the jiaozi, those fantastic dumplings. But you had an interesting experience with a scorpion.
That's right, yeah. Deep fried scorpion, as soon as I ordered it and I ate into it, the tail like stung me. It like
Really?
pricked into my upper lip. And I think it's like it's karma on me. I feel like that was how it got its revenge. You know?
Because when you bite into them, they're so crunchy. It's like they're just fried out of all existence. But there was still that bit of a sting in it?
No, it was just like a little prick. So I mean, I'm hoping the poison's gone. It better be because it was a few years from now. But I just remembered my the person that I ordered off from laughing in my face, and my brother who was there with me was like just concerned the whole way. Like, are you poisoned? Are you going to die? I had a great time.
Yeah, stay away from scorpions, but the rest of the street food is fantastic. Thank you so much,
100%.
Brendan.
Thanks so much.
Yvonne, as you mentioned earlier, Golden Week, China's national holiday, began on Friday.
It's a big week of travel. Around 650 million domestic trips are expected to be made during the 7-day period. But that's lower than pre-COVID years, with the pandemic still keeping many at home. Hundreds of thousands of spectators also watched a flag-raising ceremony in Tiananmen Square. The day was also marked by air shows and celebrations across the country. And, of course, the occasional hairdo. Now, this video of a mother plaiting her daughter's hair like a star with red ribbons went viral.
Well, despite recent tensions with America, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken sent good wishes to China.
Stan, Mr. Blinken wished the people of China peace, happiness and prosperity. The congratulatory National Day message could be a sign the two powers are trying to ease tensions. Military officials from both nations held 2 days of talks last week on a range of defence issues. Washington said both sides reaffirmed consensus to keep communication channels open.
众所周知，由于美方不断对华挑衅扼压，致使中美两军关系面临着不少困难和挑战，但两军之间始终保持着沟通。
But Yvonne, China's National Day celebrations have coincided with increasing pressure on Taiwan.
The weekend saw a record number of Chinese military aircraft enter Taiwan's air defence zone. Taiwan's defence ministry said a total of 39 planes entered the island's airspace on Saturday, following 38 planes on Friday.
中国一直穷兵黩武，破坏区域和平，并且很多恶法行径。中国这样的做法已经越来越被世界、被国际社会唾弃。
Beijing has so far made no public comment, but state-run tabloid The Global Times quoted a Chinese military expert as saying the incursions were a very practical way to celebrate the National Day and that the increasing scale of exercises near Taiwan is normal and routine. China has been sending military planes into the area south of Taiwan on a frequent basis for more than a year.
And there were some raucous scenes in Taiwan's parliament this week too.
Yes, Dan, Taiwan's legislature is no stranger to unruly behaviour, and last week there were chaotic scenes as lawmakers from Taiwan's opposition Kuomintang scuffled with members of the ruling Democratic Progressive Party over the government's handling of the pandemic. The fracas comes only a week after the opposition elected a new chairman, former leader Eric Chu. Now, he's hinted he wants to establish better ties with Beijing.
我们要重建两岸交流的平台跟沟通的管道，在党纲党章的规范之下进行交流。
China has welcomed the appointment.
我们期望中国国民党和我们一道，坚持共同政治基础，坚守民族大义。
Thanks, Yvonne. And Beijing's One China policy leaves no room for misunderstanding when it comes to Taiwan.
There is but one China in the world. Taiwan is an inalienable part of the Chinese territory.
A notion disputed by many who live on the island, around 180 kilometres off the coast.
We are an independent country already, and we call ourselves Republic of China, Taiwan.
The history of the island goes back thousands of years, with merchants known to visit the indigenous population from what is now southern China as early as the 16th century. A Dutch colony was set up in the 17th century before the Qing dynasty took control for more than 200 years. The island was lost to the Japanese in 1895, until the end of World War II saw Taiwan returned to the Republic of China. Then, when the communists won the revolution, the retreating nationalist government made its way across the Taiwan Strait, setting up camp, moving its capital to Taipei, and taking around 1.2 million people with them. Both claim to be the legitimate government of China, but the reunification of the island with the mainland has long been an aim of Beijing. Only 15 countries recognise Taiwan. The United Nations and countries like Australia acknowledge only one China, seeing Taiwan as a separate region. However, unofficial relations with Taipei have continued, as has the belief that the USA would provide support to Taiwan in the event of hostile conflict.
Well, Taiwan says it's recorded a record number of Chinese military jets flying into its air defence zone.
Tensions have risen in recent years, as has the rhetoric.
On the Taiwan question, there is no room for compromise or concession from the Chinese government.
那就是中国必须正视中华民国台湾的存在的事实，而不是否定台湾人民共同建立的民主国家的体制。
No country will be able to deprive China's mission of national reunification.
And the threats of violence, along with the pledge from Beijing to reunify by 2049.
We do not promise to renounce the use of force and reserve the right to use all necessary measures.
Joseph Wu is the Foreign Minister of Taiwan. Minister Wu, thank you so much for giving us your time. It's much appreciated.
It's my pleasure.
Do you feel threatened by mainland China right now?
Yes. The answer is rather simple. If you look at the Chinese military activities around Taiwan, it is a threat, and it's very threatening.
But threats and intimidation are one thing. Do you believe that Xi Jinping would actually act on those threats?
That is something that we have been watching very carefully. In real life world, there's not a black and white situation, but we are very concerned that China is going to launch a war against Taiwan at some point. Even though the threat may not be imminent at this point, but there might be some conditions that China may use force against Taiwan. For instance, if their internal situation is getting more serious than before, and in the very classical way of understanding about the authoritarianism, they might launch a crisis externally in order to divert domestic attention. So in the recent power ration or power outages in China, that is something that we have been observing very carefully, because we are concerned if the domestic discontent or economic slowdown is getting very serious, Taiwan might become a target of this authoritarianism to divert its domestic attention.
Here's the other thing that could precipitate just such an attack, and that would be if Taiwan made any formal moves towards independence. Would you rule that out right now, or is that something that could still happen in the future?
Taiwan is a democracy, and therefore, Taiwan's government need to observe and follow the majority view. And the majority view here in Taiwan, very consistently throughout the public opinion surveys, the people here want to maintain the status quo. If you look at the situation here in Taiwan, I'm sure you would agree with me that Taiwan is not under any country's jurisdiction. We elect our own government democratically, and the government here in Taiwan is exercising exclusive jurisdiction over the territory under its control. Even though we do not have diplomatic recognition by the most important countries in the world, but we do have very substantial unofficial relations with each other. And to us, that is great. For example, our relations with Australia, the officials in between the two sides have been interacting with each other substantially, and we trade with each other substantially. And when it comes to Taiwan's participation in international organizations or international activities, the Australian government is always one of those who will stand up for Taiwan.
You say that Australia would stand up for Taiwan, but would you seriously expect that Australia would defend Taiwan, put troops on the ground in the event of an attack from China?
That is a hypothetical question.
But so that may not be a hypothetical question. You've said that you fear an attack and that you're preparing for an invasion. So again, I ask you, would Australia be expected to fight alongside you?
It's our policy that we would defend ourselves by ourselves. Taiwan is absolutely committed to defend itself. So whether there's going to be a war or not, we will continue to strengthen our defense capabilities in safeguarding our own democracy, safeguarding our own sovereignty. So that is the bottom line. But of course, when there's a crisis, if the Australian government can go along with other major partners of ours and tell China that the invasion, the war is not right, that will be highly appreciated.
But Minister, words are not going to be enough, are they? Just recently on this program, we had a figure in China who is very influential saying specifically that he does not believe that the United States or any other country would actually sacrifice itself, shed blood in defence of Taiwan. Words won't be enough to deter China.
I think you might be right, but we also understand the situation. We understand our own situation. The defense of Taiwan is in our own hands, and we are absolutely committed to that. And if China is going to launch a war against Taiwan, we will fight to the end, and that is our commitment.
The reality is, isn't it, that you would be massively outgunned. China has the biggest army in the world, the biggest navy in the world. It's continuing to pump more money into its military year on year. How could you possibly win a war against such overwhelming odds?
I think that might be a wrong assessment. Our military is quite capable. It's not like Afghanistan at all. Taiwan's military, even though is being described as having a significant gap with the Chinese military, but we are not totally defenseless. We also have our own navy, we have our own air force, and we have also prepared asymmetric strategy in dealing with China, and we also produce our own defensive articles. I cannot elaborate on that, and I'm sure if China is going to launch an attack against Taiwan, I think they are going to suffer tremendously as well. So that is our commitment. We are willing to defend ourselves.
I wanted to get your thoughts on the AUKUS agreement and whether you support Australia acquiring nuclear-powered submarines, something that China has said is a provocative act.
I'm not sure about the real situation in 2040 when Australia is going to have to deploy the first nuclear-powered submarines. But during this period of time, if you look at the dynamics in the Indo-Pacific, we are pleased to see that the like-minded partners of Taiwan, the United States, and the UK and Australia are working closer with each other to acquire more advanced defensive articles so that we can defend Indo-Pacific, the rule-based international order in this region, and to defend its shared interest in this region. So we are pleased to see that Australia is playing a bigger role.
Would you make a similar agreement? Is this the sort of thing that you're looking for? Would you go to the United States and say, we want that same technology, nuclear-powered submarines, to defend Taiwan?
That is a very good question. But we have a different war strategy. We need to go asymmetric, and we need to have a different type of philosophy in defeating China if there's going to be a war. So nuclear-powered submarine is not something that we are seeking.
Minister Wu, again, thank you so much for giving us your time.
You are absolutely welcome. Thank you.
A major reset appears to be underway in China's struggling economy. An old catchphrase is once again popular, common prosperity, but what will the crackdown on the country's billionaires mean for the average citizen? David Chow reports.
We're men in tights. We roam around the forest looking for money.
This is every business owner's worst nightmare. Their hard-earned money taken away and given to the poor.
A woman of your beauty has no need for such decorations.
Some months ago, Xi Jinping announced that he wanted to increase the wages of China's poorest citizens and adjust excessive incomes, all in the name of common prosperity.
取得更为明显的实质性进展。
Common prosperity is President Xi's new catchphrase. It's basically his plan to narrow the gap between rich and poor and redistribute wealth across the country. To achieve this, China has started to crack down on its biggest and most well-known companies, either for allegedly breaking the law or creating social problems of some kind. Earlier this year, regulators slapped retail giant Alibaba with a $3.8 billion fine, the highest ever handed down in China, for breaching competition laws. The ruling came after its billionaire founder Jack Ma criticized China's financial system in a controversial speech.
但是中国的问题，我认为正好相反。我们的当铺思想要依靠信用体系的发展。
It is a bit of a risk for people to be included in the rich list. Apparently, once you're included in the rich list, you're more likely to get into legal trouble.
One industry that's created quite a few billionaires is the tutoring business, taking advantage of a hyper-competitive education system. But the industry was decimated almost overnight when radical laws were introduced, banning tutoring companies from earning any profit.
Meituan Dianping is China's leading e-commerce platform for services.
And China's version of Uber Eats, Meituan, is reportedly facing a massive fine for exploiting its delivery riders. It's no wonder Chinese tech stocks have been absolutely pummeled. Their value has plunged by more than $1 trillion this year, and that's why Shanghai and Hong Kong markets are doing much worse than everyone else. And the billionaires behind them have seen their personal wealth drop by $100 billion.
In a way, it's kind of funny. I mean, if you thought this was a big problem, why didn't you do it before? Because you are the power. Like Robin Hood was trying to do that against the existing power. Here, the existing power is saying, wait a minute, why are you becoming so rich? The question I would have is, didn't you notice before, you know?
Well, the Chinese government has definitely noticed now, and to avoid its wrath, there's been a sudden surge of generosity lately. China's richest and most high-profile tycoons have pledged to give away billions from their fortunes to charitable causes for the sake of, you guessed it, common prosperity. Common prosperity isn't a new concept. It's been around since the 1950s, when Chairman Mao was in charge of a much poorer and more socialist China. But when Deng Xiaoping took over in the late 70s, he decided that the economy would grow much faster if he allowed some people to get rich first, and worried about equality and socialism later.
Such a visible hyper inequality can lead to social unrest. And for the Chinese government, social stability is very important.
China has long been maintaining social order through its strong economy. But after decades of blockbuster growth, its economy has slowed down dramatically, a trend that began even before COVID. But it's still performing much better than many other countries. On top of that, the 20th Communist Party Congress is just around the corner, where Xi will almost certainly be reinstalled as president for his third term. And with another term comes renewed pressure to have a vision for the future, like a grand plan to boost China's economy and fix up its worsening inequality. But that's easier said than done.
I actually think what China is trying to do in itself is not a bad idea, because when you become richer, you need to distribute, you need to give better opportunities to your people.
But it's a fine line. Other economists have warned that if China goes overboard with heavy-handed regulation, it might get in the way of innovation and economic growth, and lead to common poverty instead.
And David Chow joins me now. David, all eyes have been on the Chinese property giant Evergrande. What's the latest there?
Well, Stan, there have been some extraordinary developments. Earlier today, shares of Evergrande listed on the Hong Kong stock market were suspended from trading. No reason given. And it comes after Evergrande missed two very big interest payments in the past week and a half, totaling $180 million that it owes its foreign bondholders. Now, Evergrande is unable to pay these debts, and there's radio silence on what it plans to do next. So it really is depending on a bailout from the Chinese government, because it owes more than $400 billion worth of debt it can't afford to repay. Now, the Chinese government is caught between a rock and a hard place, because if the Chinese government bails out Evergrande, it sends a bad signal to its citizens that there are some companies that are too big to fail, and that undermines common prosperity. Now, if it chooses to not bail out Evergrande and let it fail, then millions of mum and dad investors who bought off-the-plan apartments are going to get badly burnt.
And just on that point, though, there may be an upside, if we can call it that here. There may be some cheaper houses down the line.
Yeah, so social media was buzzing over the weekend about apartments in China, in northeast China, selling for as little as 10,000 yuan, which is about 2,000 Aussie dollars.
That's just ridiculously cheap, isn't it? So these are places that are abandoned, essentially. It's just a fire sale, like we saw after the global financial crash in the US.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is reminiscent of the GFC, as you said. About 13 years ago, there were houses in Detroit selling for as low as $2,000 because there was a credit crunch and banks just really needed the money and were selling these repossessed houses for dirt cheap prices. And essentially that's what we're seeing in some very far off regions of China, far away from the capital.
David, thank you. And that's all we have on this week's show. Next week we meet Howie Yu, described as the Greta Thunberg of China. I'm Stan Grant. Have a great night.